Okay, everybody, I'm going to start. You can hear my voice probably a little bit better. Again, for those coming on in, come on closer. His voice is naturally quiet. There's no microphone in this room, so we do not buy. I have teacher voice. He does not, okay? His voice has 2 volumes, quiet and really loud. So that's from when he was an interrogator. We don't want interrogator voice. So
pretend I'm an extrovert.
Yeah, exactly. Come on up. There's like a hidden rule that you can't sit in the front row, but that does not apply here.
Everyone who's sitting in the front row has a $10 Amazon card underneath your chair.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm Miranda Watson. This is James Rosone. We do write under pen names, so
we encourage you guys, if you're starting out, to consider that. You don't have to, but it's something to think about, because if you plan on writing for a long time, down the road you may look back and say, man, I wish I had done that. And kind of created something along those lines. It's from more about a privacy type thing, where the internet has gotten more prolific. It's just substantially easier to find people and connect with people. I mean, that's good, but it also has its negative connotations as well. And so, at least providing a layer of anonymity can be kind of helpful and nice. It's not going to obviously prevent everything.
Well, no, I mean, and the reason we started writing under pen names is because of his history in the military and what he did when he was in the military, because he was an interrogator. The name that he uses is actually the name that he used when he was an interrogator, because they did not use their real names when they were interrogating people for obvious reasons. But we wanted to reduce the risk that someone would randomly show up at our house one day. And it's a real concern. There's some weird people on the internet, y'all.
There are. And depending on what you write, you can get some really colorful comments too. So, there's that to consider too. So we really wanted to offer this kind of a session to people, because this is a topic that is not talked about. It's talked about in like a superfluous manner. It's not really talked about on like solutions or alternatives and how you can both live with it but also succeed through it. So a little bit on my background. I originally joined the military back in '96. I was doing terrible in college. I grew up as a homeschool kid back in the 80s and early 90s, before it was cool and before the internet was around and cell phones, and you could connect with all these cool groups and have friends like that. So for me, when I went to college, that was quite the shock and adjustment, and I did not have a very good first year. So I was originally looking at joining the military because I'd always been interested in the military. Both my grandpas had fought in World War II, and my uncle was in the Army National Guard at the time, and so he ended up reaching out and talking with me and kind of hooked me up with one of the Guard units that he knew a bunch of people in, and that was how I got into initially into the military, and then into going to college and being able to afford it and pay for it and get some of that taken care of. My plan was never to really kind of stay in the military. I was going into banking. That's what I wanted to do when I was in college. Obviously 9/11 changed things around, and I left the Army side and I went into the Air Force side, and found this really cool job called a linguist debriefer, and it sounded kind of cool and neat. You get to go and debrief individuals and acquire information. And then you show up for training with the Army at Fort Huachuca, and you start doing your training there, and you're like, wow, we're actually interrogating people. It's a whole different ballgame. You're going to do a lot of that high-intensity Jack Bauer stuff, and it's a whole different world.
Minus the fingernails. He has never done anything with fingernails.
No, there's worse things to do to people than break fingernails and break bones. Psychological warfare and mental, screwing with the mind is by far worse than the physical body part. Bones heal, the mind doesn't, or the mind doesn't heal as quickly. We learned that lesson in our particular profession. So the challenge is when you do high-intensity jobs, or you go through a traumatic event, whether it's a sexual trauma, it's abuse, you witness a violent crime, you had crime committed against you, or you were in law enforcement, first responders, or in the military yourself like that. You're going to encounter traumatic events. That's also part of life, unfortunately, too, is encountering events like that. The challenge is how do we cope with those? And then how do we overcome those things and not become a victim or someone who is now codependent on government services, other types of handouts, and just different programs to help you survive. In the past, before we had the internet, before we had self-publishing, before you had YouTube and different things like that, that was kind of how a lot of people got by. And it was not a very good existence because we were meant for so much more than just getting by. And writing is a great form of therapy. That was something that was referred to me by someone at the VA was, well, have you thought about writing? You know, I wrote a lot of papers and stuff for grad school, so sure, you know, I know how to write. And then they said, well, why don't you write what you want to read? Well, that was a whole watershed moment right there, and so I started creating the books I want to read. And that kind of took off. And as it continued to do really well, I started to think, well, maybe I can do this long term. And then when my job, part of our company got sold to BlackRock, and so they laid a bunch of us off, and now I had a lot of time. So I was like, all right, well, we've been writing on the side. If I can work, 60, 70 hours for corporate America, I sure as heck can do that much time writing. And when you're able to dedicate that kind of time, you can really do quite well with your writing. And so it started to take off. But what I found is that a lot of people don't realize that writing therapy can also turn into a career, and you can support yourself. Because the challenge with a lot of veterans, at least in my community and my experiences, people are dealing with PTSD. The biggest problem is it's hard for them to work a 9-to-5 job. There are medications the VA does provide, and it can be helpful in controlling your symptoms and your outbursts and your just negative behaviors. I mean, for our job, training as an interrogator, you're an absolute manipulative son of a bitch. I mean, that is your job. Your job is to manipulate people to get what you want, get the information you need to go capture, kill bad guys. That's your job. You hear an awful lot of really horrible things, and you see a lot of bad stuff, and you guys, we inflict and do a lot of bad things. That's hard to turn off. When you come home and you start working normal jobs, it's very difficult to turn that type of training and that behavior off in corporate America and not be that same manipulative person. It makes you very effective in certain types of jobs, sales positions, negotiations, certain types of positions like that. But when it comes to interacting with your coworkers and people, that's not the kind of behavior that is smiled upon. So what do? You take the medications, and it helps. It controls those symptoms, controls that behavior. But now you're left in a cognitive state where you can't actually perform at that high level you need to retain your job.
I mean, I want to interrupt for just a little bit. Some of the things that he's struggled with while taking the medications is like memory loss. So like I'll have a conversation with him at times, and then 2 days later he'll ask me the question. I'm like, we had a whole conversation about this, and he'll be like, I really don't remember that.
It just recalls. Recalling the information really quick.
And so you have to find coping mechanisms for that kind of thing, because you have to write down stuff after you've had that conversation, or you have to put it in your phone, or you have to find different ways to sort of overcome some of these issues and struggles that you have when you're taking these kinds of medications.
I mean, for me, so I don't mind sharing the stuff I've done, because medications maybe do help, and I've also done some different psychedelics and other types of medications too, and I'm happy to share how those work out too. So when I'm with the VA stuff, I use trazodone is a good drug for helping me to stay asleep. I fall asleep no problem. I can't stay asleep. I just snap out of it when I hear the slightest noises, and I'm immediately alert. I'm up. I'm ready. And I only got 5 hours of sleep, or only maybe sometimes a couple hours of sleep. So that was a bit of a problem for me. So that was a medication that helped put me in REM sleep and keep me there, or at least keep me there for 3 or 4 hours. God's honest truth, I probably only sleep about 4 or 5 hours a day anyways. And so I just kind of function at that. Prazosin's a really great one for controlling nightmares and problems. For me, my problem is turning the interrogations off, because invariably you forget to ask questions. A certain question, like when you're going in to do a raid, Is the door open in or out? You need to know that, because we need to know if we're going to hit that door with a ram, or if we're going to guys run up there and run the chains through it and use the Humvee to rip it out of the frame. You need to know, are there locks on the tops of the doors and on the bottom of the floor, or is it just on the center? Because if there's locks on the top and bottom, you need to know so you can use the, a shotgun uses a slug to punch those out, so when they yank it out of the frame, it goes out. And you need to know that stuff, because if you don't ask these little nuanced questions, little nuanced things, a raid doesn't go right. And if a raid doesn't go right, we don't capture the guys alive, because we're gonna, you get in a gunfight, and invariably people get killed or get injured, and that really sucks. And so for me, part of the challenge was I would have these things replayed in my head. Did I ask this? Did I ask this? I forgot that. I need to go back and ask this. And then, just ask this. This person wouldn't have gotten killed, or wouldn't have gotten shot, or these people would have gotten killed in this particular building here, because we wouldn't have to flatten it. Things like that. You just go over and over and over, and you start to find yourself living in a should-have world instead of just acceptance. The enemy gets a vote. You didn't choose that. They chose that.
So when you first started writing, the very first project you did was actually to write out all of your experiences as an interrogator, and you were telling me that you found that to be beneficial because it was kind of like you could dump it out of your head, and to not have that constantly swimming around in your thoughts so much, because it's already out.
Yeah, and one of the things they do is cognitive behavioral therapy sucks. I never recommend that to anyone unless you are taking some really good drugs beforehand and during it. Because it is going to trigger, it is going to trigger the hell out of you by going through that.
I'm a therapist and I agree.
Yeah, I did that. The first time I tried it at the VA, I think I made it 2 or 3 sessions and quit. And it's like a 70 or 80% quit rate. It's just really high. Nobody makes it through. The second time I went through and did it, I was back using Lexapro, and it was easier to get through, because Lexapro just deadens your nerves. You just become very emotionally detached. Your dog died, you just don't care. You are an emotionally detached human being, that kind of drug. It's great for controlling your triggers, your tempers, your outbursts, things like that. But you're just not a lovely, cuddly person. You're just, you're not an asshole, which is why you take it. But it's very hard to have that emotional attachment to your family members, your kids, things like that. So for me, I wanted to get off the damn stuff. But it's difficult. And one of the side effects is short-term memory loss. It is hard as hell to recall information and get the information you need to perform your jobs. I have a graduate degree from Oxford. I'm a pretty smart guy. And when you go to some of these institutions, you get certain degrees. You get into certain types of jobs and professions. And these jobs pay really well, 150 plus a year. They also require you to work 60 plus hours a week. They have very high demands on you. And when you can't perform at those levels, you don't stay at those jobs very long. They're paying you for that skill. And when you can't offer that skill because you're taking medications that are suppressing your ability to do that, that harms your ability to support your family. And this is where writing comes in.
So one of the huge benefits, I think, of having this be the profession is that there are bad days when you have PTSD, and you can actually go around those. Sometimes the best thing for him is just to take a nap, like to just literally check out for a few hours and reset the mind. And so you cannot do that on your day job. You start taking a nap at the cubicle, you're going to get noticed, you're going to get fired. But with this, you can just literally take a nap. Or you're feeling really agitated, you can go for a walk. You can do other things to sort of help get yourself back into a better state of mind.
Yeah, just taking time off sometimes. Sometimes you just need a day or two to just, for me, when I'm having super bad days like that, for me, I'll just take that I'm taking a clonazepam or whatever, and I'm just down. I'm just gonna knock out and probably sleep 18 hours for the next couple of days. And just kind of reset my brain, so to speak, and try to get through it that way. Because if I don't find that kind of a solution, or do something like that, I'm going to be kind of an aggressive asshole. and I don't want to be that person. Now, I would normally be that way early on, but as I've gotten older, more years have gone by, I've started to recognize when those things are starting to happen more, and I try to preempt that by just knocking myself out. Because then I go to sleep, and guess what? The next day, I don't feel so bad. I don't feel like the world's ending today because I just slept for 14 hours. My brain's reset. It's a new day, I woke up, there's something new's gonna happen, and now it's not the end of the world anymore.
Do you want to speak to what happened in like 2015, you know, when you were out of work, and this is like when you were sort of just starting, and...
I mean, so 2015 for me was kind of like that was just a really shitty year for me. You know, I had a really cool kick-ass job I was doing in Europe. You know, again, we were hunting terrorists and doing things like that, but this time was different because we weren't in Iraq where we could just overtly do it. In Europe, you have to do it on the down low a lot more. It was a great job. I enjoyed it. I spent probably 22 weeks of the year traveling, mostly to shithole countries in Europe. There are a lot of them there in the Balkans and Caucasus regions. It's just, they have donkey carts in certain villages where they use as regular transportation. It's very backwards in certain countries still. And then you'll have a BMW in the major cities. It's just diametrically different. But you know, that job eventually went away. You know, we lost, you know, the sequestration cut a lot of jobs. And so that went away. I came home. I had another job for a year. They lost their government contract, and then my position went away. And it went away as I was in the middle of doing my security clearance review. And that, I suddenly wasn't able to finish my review because my job went away. Well, then my clearance went away. And now everything I've done for the last 16 years that I know how to do really well, I can't do. So now I'm like, what do I do? That was a hard period because as most of you know, 2015 going into 2016 was not exactly a good economic time for our country either. So finding jobs in DC where all your experiences in government and intelligence and you don't have a clearance, good luck. So that was kind of a tough year for me. I think at that point you kind of look at things and you start coming to the realization that you're just worth more dead than alive. Your insurance policy is past its 3-year, suicide clause point. You look at that and say, well, at least they can get this, because you're 14, 15 months into not working, not bringing in anything, and you don't qualify for unemployment because the contract went away. It doesn't qualify for unemployment. And my wife is working, but she's making too much money to qualify for assistance, but it's not enough for us to really be okay in DC.
DC area is
very
so expensive.
Making
making good money, you're underwater every month.
So it was quite a trying time, and I think where I kind of finally hit was like, okay, I'm just going to try to arrange and have one really good day. I'll go to bed, and I'll just take too many of my pills and just be done. Go to sleep, now wake up. And waiting for them to fall asleep, I fall asleep. But then the next day, like I say, you wake up the next day and it's not the end of the world. And that's when I was like, okay, so I started talking more with the VA, got some different medications. Part of the problem with me was they kept going on again, off again, on again, off again. That's a killer. That is really hard to do with SSRI drugs.
Those are not meant to be stopped cold. Just FYI, for anyone who's ever taking those.
The VA have been doing that to me for freaking years, going on and off. It's just brutal. And that's when writing therapy was mentioned and brought up. And then I was like, okay, so now I had a new mission and a purpose. And that's half the problem with veterans is we're ingrained in our jobs, our professions, it's our identity, and we're focused on, this is our mission, this is our life, this is what we do. Well, when that mission's gone, what do you do? You're missionless. And then that's when the problems become really, really bad. And so for me, then writing became the new mission. And so now it was, okay, I'm going to create this cool, kick-ass story and book series I want to read. And that was my focus, my mission. And that was able to keep me kind of going for quite a while. And then, again, I found another job, so working there for a year, They sold part of the company off, lost my job again. Again, kind of depressed, but at the same time, our second series really took off. And then we started seeing, wow, we're hitting like $5,000 a month. Then the second book came out, it was like $13,000 a month. I was like, holy crap, we're actually making serious money at this. I can do this. I can survive. I can thrive and make a living and support myself and not be in this situation anymore.
The timing for this was just really
good.
It was just really the right timing.
Because it was kind of hitting the end of the rope. She's like, it's not a bitch. It's the third time in 5 years that you lose your job. And I don't know if I'm going to recover from this particular round, but the writing really took off at that point. And what I found too is that for me, the writing, it is therapy, but the topics and things that I write what I know, and I write what I like to read. But that's also, for me, is very, very therapeutic, and it's very real, because I've done so much of the things I write about. It's very authentic in the writing and very real. And a lot of the veterans and other people who read it really connect with that stuff, because there's lots of nuances and subtleties that I'm able to craft into there that only they catch, only they pick up. Certain word choices, certain types of situations. Scene when they're driving and the explosion happens and the guys are in the vehicle for the briefest moment, can just see the sand and the dirt just momentarily just sitting there, floating for a second before reality snaps back, and then everything hit, the concussion hits. Those are little nuances that unless you've been in those environments and seen that stuff and experienced that stuff, it's very hard to write because you don't know, you haven't been exposed to it. And the readers really enjoy that stuff, and it becomes a very profitable endeavor for you because now you have a job that you can make a good living at for you and your family, while still handling and dealing with your whatever your symptoms or your challenges are. Because I'll have months where I have no PTSD problems at all, and then I will have 2, 3, or 4 months really, really freaking hard to get through, and just really brutal.
Do you want to speak to some of the alternative type things that you've done in addition to what the VA hands out?
Yeah.
Here's the way the VA works, just for those of you who are unaware. You have to fail out of their list. You have to go through their checklist. So you do thing 1, you're going to fail it. And you have to fail out of that before they'll offer you thing 2, which might work better. And then you have to fail out of that before they give you thing 3, which is actually the thing that will work for you. That's how the VA works.
And they don't, because it's a government agency, they have to abide by the FDA and whatever things are currently approved, which means there are not a lot of alternatives that they can test and use, even if they are scientifically proven to be really good. I'd heard about something called stellate ganglion block injections, or SGB. I heard about that from a 60 Minutes episode with Dakota Myers, and basically what they do is they, these nerves on either side of your neck here, and what they'll do is they do a nerve block basically. And what that does is when you go into that fight or flight mode, brain gets triggered, sends that down through the body to the heart, you dump your adrenaline, and heart races, and now you're just ready to roll. Well, when they do the SGB, it blocks that. So brain gets triggered, sends the message down, it bounces back and hits the brain and restarts because it got blocked. Now, sometimes you may only need 1 shot. Sometimes you may need 2 or 3 shots.
There's different. So they only do 1 at a time because it can partially. It
numbs half your face.
It numbs half your face for a few hours. So you don't want to do that to both sides of your face at the same time. So they only do 1 at a time, but sometimes one side is more effective for a person than the other side. You really just have to kind of try it out to see what's going to work.
It depends on how long you've been dealing with this, how severe it is. It may take you a little while. It may take more than 1 shot on either side. You may need to do 3 on one side and 1 on the other, or 2 and 3. You're gonna have to kind of tinker with it a little bit. And they don't do them all at once. Usually it's about a week or so apart, or 2 weeks apart. And maybe it lasts 6 months, maybe it lasts 3 years. It really depends on you and your body. The goal is to kind of just block it, so to speak, to allow you to, okay, situation happened, I did totally freak out. I bought myself the 5 seconds I needed to realize this isn't the end of the world. I can calm myself down or figure out some other coping mechanism or alternative. The next thing that I've tried, medical marijuana works for some people. It doesn't work for me because the strand that did work to help with the anxiety or the PTSD, problem is I'm too baked, I can't work. And I can't afford to be baked 8 hours a day. I have to work, I have to earn a living, and I have student loans and a house to pay off. So I don't want to be baked all the time.
And I don't want him to be baked all the time.
I just can't do that. So for me, that's not an alternative. That's not a viable alternative for me. I tried it, didn't work, I moved on. The next thing that I did try that I thought worked out pretty good was actually the psychedelics. So ketamine for me was one that does work pretty decent. It's the ketamine therapy. Ketamine, there's 2 ways that you can take in ketamine. I've done both. One is usually through an IV. Usually it's an anesthesiologist. Same doctor does the SGB injections for me, also does the ketamine. And then there's oral ketamine, where you basically take the capsule, the tablets, and you put them under your tongue and let it just dissolve. They both work slightly different from each other. My personal preference is I would rather do the IV, although it is a lot more expensive. It's usually around $350 to $450 for one treatment. My doctor does something that not all the doctors do, and I appreciate this. When you do the psychedelic trips like that, you have no control of whether it's good or bad. And if a bad trip is bad, it is really bad, really bad. And if it's good, it's really good, but you have no control over which one you're going to get. What he does to try to help give you the best chance at that, though, and I will say it works out really great, is he'll hit you with a benzodiazepine beforehand. So he'll put you into a really happy lullaby state and then hits you with the ketamine after that. So you go into it in that state, you tend to have a trip in that state. Whereas if you're not doing that, you're going to be wherever your mind is currently in sometimes, which is why they'll tell you, clear the mind, listen to this, listen to that, clear the mind, stuff like that, because they don't want you to be anxious, terrified, because when that ketamine hits, and that's your mindset, that's going to play out in a really nasty way. And there's no escape, because you're in that trip till you come out. And I can tell you from experience with that when you go down the rabbit hole, you're going down Alice in Wonderland's rabbit hole, it's going to feel sometimes like years, sometimes like a lifetime or multiple lifetimes. It is not, in that moment, it is not quick.
It's like you're in the movie Inception, apparently.
Yeah, I basically describe it, it's kind of a mixture between like the Matrix and Inception. It's the Matrix in that you know it's not real. It's Inception in that you keep falling deeper and deeper and deeper. Like one dreamscape and scenario will morph and fall into the next. And then you'll go through that, and then that will morph and fall into the next. And sometimes you're going to go through 4, 5, 6, 7 of these things like that. And you get to a point where I don't know what's reality and whether I'm awake or not.
So what's the benefit of this? Because it sounds terrible when you're talking about it.
So the benefit to the ketamine, though, what it does is it actually helps your brain. It helps the neuroreceptors in your brain to actually heal and recover. Because with any kind of severe trauma or PTSD, part of the problem is your brain has gotten these bad pathways built, these trigger pathways built. So that's why, for me, I worked in the prison camp where I was at Camp Cropper in Baghdad. Okay, so we have 4,500 prisoners there, and you can imagine what the smell is of a camp with 4,500 prisoners in the heat, packed into very tightly confined places, and the amount of feces and food and trash and what that smells like. So that for me is my number one trigger right there, is smell. So for me, baby diapers and certain types of trash right there every time. And that's a neuroreceptor response in the brain. and that's what's happened. So the ketamine has helped to diminish that a lot, because it helps when you're in that state. It helps the mind to actually repair and rebuild those receptors, and so you don't smell that smell and instantly dive down that hole, because it's so prevalent. The ketamine kind of helps to create all kinds of new pathways around it, so it's not that one. You have a better chance of getting out of that. It's not something you do all the time. Like my doctor in Tampa, it's a 6 treatment thing he does. It's a Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and when you do the oral or the intravenous one, it's usually down about 20 minutes. It'll feel like 10 years or 20 years or a lifetime. It'll feel like that, but it's 15 to 20 minutes. And then, probably an hour later, it's completely out of your system, gone, you're 100% normal. Now, you will have the best night of your sleep that day and probably the rest of that week. And for me, I always feel a million times more calm and better for days, or probably more like weeks, sometimes a month, or sometimes a couple of months. I did the 6, and then I would go usually and do maybe one every 9 to 12 months. I'll go and do another one. The oral one, I don't recommend that one personally. I've done that one probably a lot more than I've done the IV one because of the cost difference. That one's a lot cheaper. That one's probably more around $125 to $150 a treatment. You work with a doctor, and then they send it to a compounding agent, and they FedEx the stuff to you. And so you have the tabs and stuff, and there's different doses. You gotta start you on a low dose. You see how well you respond to that, and then you dose up till you get the right dose you want. That one's a lot harder to deal with, though. Aside from the awful taste and stuff, you've got to put it on your tongue and sit there and let it go there for a little while. Nausea, you're going to be a little harder with that one too, so you take an anti-nausea medication. But for me, that one it takes forever and a day to get out of it. Once you come out of the trip, it's going to take you probably close to about 40 minutes before you can start actually moving your body around. Your body just feels really tingly. You can move your toes and fingers, but you can't you're just smacking yourself.
And you need to have someone there with you if you're going to do that, because he'll inevitably try to get up and go to the bathroom, whoa there, soldier.
You're usually going face first, because you're not going to be able to stand. You're not going to be able to physically move. And it takes a while to get out of that. That probably takes a good hour and 20 minutes or so to really kind of come out of that whole feeling there. And then for me, the hangover on that probably lasts a good, probably about 2 hours or so. So for me, if I take that, I'm useless for probably about 4 or 5 hours. I don't particularly like that version of it, because for me, I also don't have the benzo when I do that one. So I don't know the trip I'm going to get. At this point, I'm 50-50 for good and bad. And I'm really not liking the bad ones, because those take a long time to get out of. Sometimes it'll take you 6 or 8 hours to kind of feel normal. And it's a very disassociative feeling. For me, the oral one is very disassociative. You could spend hours where I don't know if this is real. You're still coming out of it, and you don't know if you're still in the trip. I don't like that feeling personally, so I wouldn't recommend that particular version of it. There's other psychedelics I haven't personally tried those other ones yet, because you have to go to Mexico and other places. I haven't tried those yet.
We're getting closer to the 10-minute mark. I wanted to also touch on work-life balance a little bit, and how, so he talked about the mission and all of that. So he does have a tendency with the whole PTSD thing to overwork and to sort of pour himself too much into these worlds. And so I think that you have to find that balance, because there was a point there where he was literally working overnight, not sleeping for an entire night, several times.
I wake up at 6 on a Monday. We have a 3-year-old, a 7-year-old, and I. Okay, I don't sleep much beyond 5:30 or 6, because that's 3-year-old wants her milk and she's up. Mm-hmm. But then I wouldn't go to bed till probably 9 or 10 o'clock on Tuesday, because I'll just work through it. Sometimes you're just wired. You just can't sleep. And I'm I'm tired of spending 5 hours in bed trying to freaking sleep. I'm just going to work and be productive.
But also doing that, though, I think definitely increased your symptoms.
Yeah, it did.
Yeah.
Absolutely did. Made me a agitated mofo, and I was not fun to be around for a few months. We had some work things we had to get through on our business side too. Commitments with pre-orders and things like that. You just have to suck it up sometimes and just do it. That saying, you want to be the 99%, or you want to be the 1%, you got to work harder than the 99%. Well, when you want to be the 0.1%, that's a whole nother game. That's a level that requires a different level of commitment. Not everyone wants to achieve. Because you see that with writing. A lot of people are hitting these. There's a difference between hitting 500 grand in 1 year and hitting 500 grand 3-4 consecutive years in a row. That's a whole different level of ball game to do that. And to get to those levels requires a certain level of commitment and work ethic that very few are willing to commit, but not willing to sacrifice what's necessary to do that and stay there. And I spent my whole life working, 40 hours a week, a slow week. I mean, I'm very much used to the 80, 90 hour work weeks, and so, but I don't have to commute. I get to work whenever I want. So it's pretty flexible. It sounds like a lot, but it's really not. Especially when you don't watch any TV or movies.
So I'd like
what
to,
questions do you
yeah,
guys
we'd like
have?
to open it up for questions.
You have one in the back. It's yours.
So you talked about the alternative methods that you utilize, and thank you for kind of explaining how that worked. So are you saying then that your writing kind of replaced those therapies and gave you a good release?
I wouldn't say it's to replace anything.
Okay.
I would say it allows me to still function as a normal adult, but it more importantly allows me to support my family, because it's a little harder for me to go back into some of the corporate world and do some of the corporate things I used to working and doing, or in the government world stuff, when you're taking some of those medications and still dealing with some of that.
And I think it's a yes and, right? It's
Okay.
like this works and this works, right? But you have to do it together. And I think that's the whole thing that it's been for him, is finding out what's the magic sauce, and it's not just one thing.
We could transition our business into becoming a publisher and be wildly successful at that. I know how to do that. I can build a $100 million business out of this, and I think I could do that in 10 years. My problem is, that would mean I have to stop writing myself. Well, that's therapy in life for me. I don't know that I can do that, or I want to do that, So it's a balancing act. You had a question in the back? Or you guys? Yeah.
Yes. Right. So I used to work in corporate America as well, 80, 90 hours. So I know that world. I will say Cambridge is better than Oxford, but never mind.
Yeah, it's okay. For the Oxbridge family.
Yeah. But on a serious note, though, I think I'm scared sometimes of stopping because I'm scared, or taking a nap because I'm scared I won't have the motivation to get up again, if that makes sense as a question.
Yeah.
If you're used to the 89, you just keep on going.
Yeah.
But if I take a nap, I might never get back. So I was just wondering if you could say something about that.
So for me, I have tasks. I'll write down things.
Yeah.
I have very specific tasks I have to get done.
Right.
So it's like, okay, I'm falling asleep at my keyboard. I'm not being productive. I'm not getting things done. I need to go for a walk, do something with the kids. I need to just power down for a couple hours. And sometimes it's just like, okay, I'm powering down for a few hours, and do that, and then maybe go for a walk to wake up again, go hop in a hot shower, and then I go back to my task. Okay, here's what I need to get done, and I go right back into that work mode and just continue right back on again.
I mean, I will say, and even this is my experience, that a productive 3 hours is a whole lot better than 8 hours where you're just struggling.
Yeah.
Oh, yes. I know.
Yeah. Hot
I
shower.
know that rationally, but
Yeah.
emotionally it's hard.
Yeah.
I think sometimes too.
I think
you want to finish.
No, I get that, but if you kind of like think about it in your head, like
Yeah.
let's look at it in a math equation.
Yeah.
How much am I getting done right now? Nothing. How much will I get done if I take this 2-hour nap and then wake up and my brain is working better?
Yeah, my mind's been killing me like this whole trip, because I've got this scene I've been trying to work on finishing freaking ever, and I couldn't get it done, so I was like, screw it. Yeah, she went to bed at 11:30. I was like, whatever. So I was up to 3:30 this morning just knocking it out, but it's out. It's done. It's out of my head. I can now focus on something else for a little while, and I can roll back to what I need to finish on that chapter to be done. It's a 9,000 word chapter, just need to finish it.
So I've been very fortunate in life where I haven't had to do a lot of experiences, but I definitely have worked through a lot of emotional PTSD, and it's been really helpful, but I've also found that I get lost in it. I get stuck in it. It's hard for me to almost separate myself from the characters. And how do you deal with kind of stepping back and actually writing the story as opposed to just being so emotionally involved that it's like, as much as it helps, it wrecks?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm going to answer for you just a hair, and then you can. He writes military fictional mostly because that's his world, but he had to take a break for a little while, and so that's why we got into the military sci-fi, because it's not quite the same.
Right.
So sometimes you might have to just take a look and say, okay, this particular avenue I'm going down, it is too emotionally taxing for me. It's too real, it's too raw, it's too whatever.
Readers love, but it's just sometimes it's too taxing. I gotta take a break, and that's why I did. I took about a year off of the thrillers. I set up a 1-year pre-order when they finally let us do that, and in that period, I wrote 3 sci-fi books, and then I wrote the next 2 thrillers to get those ready to jumpstart that new series. And then, unfortunately, we showed that yesterday in our slide, is we've ended up getting into a rut where I can write. I'll write 5 books a year, but we'll publish 4. But it's only 2 books in each genre. And that's challenging because the genre, the readers tend to like, the 90-day cycle is really a good cycle. And generally people like, I mean, people will talk about the 60-day, 30-day, whatever. Honestly, 90 days is a comfortable one to work with. And the readers can kind of expect that. But when you're in 2 genres, you can't really make that work. Because sure, you're doing a book every 90 days, but it's not a book in the same genre every 90 days. It's every 6 months. For us, that still worked out good. I mean, it took off and it has made a crap ton of money. But it would have made double or triple had I been able to just focus singularly on one, because I would have been able to better game the algorithm.
Right.
I mean, I'm a bit of a marketing beast and understand the data side of things really well. And that's how I'm able to make this stuff work. But I would have been able to do substantially better if I had just focused on one. So to answer your question, that sometimes having another genre, another series, or thing like that can help. Now, maybe what you do though is you don't try to publish that and lock yourself in. Write it for your break and just let it build up until all of a sudden you've got 6 books, you've got 10 books in that line that you've been creating. And now you haven't locked yourself in where you have readers that are demanding a book and you're in 2 genres. And now your life is really, really tough for the next couple of years, because we're going to be 3 years into this cycle by the time we finish book 1 of the series. It'll be 3.5 by the time the second one finishes. That's been a grueling slog. It's made a crap ton of money. Like both series are approaching 400K that they've done it at the same time. That's really hard though, mentally and physically, to do that. I wouldn't recommend it.
Yes.
Kind of along the lines of what you guys are talking about, I was a first responder at Columbine. That was
Yeah, I can imagine.
really hard. Sorry.
No.
The first book I ever wrote was,
The experience of it all.
yes.
Yeah, mine was the same way.
I just had to, like you said, clear it. I never cleared it completely, but I made it so I could function.
Yeah.
I started writing a lot of law enforcement-based stories, fiction. It's just kind of how I made it work. They were successful under a pen name. I never wrote under my own name. They were successful. I felt good about them. But then I started having a lot of issues. I got too deep. It became, things were triggering me. I was using scenes and stuff like that that I would create that were too real to the experience. And it became not healthy anymore. So I stepped away and started writing romance, because yay. But now I'm finding that I want to go back, because that's where my passion is. And I'm terrified to do that. So the balance, like you said, of knowing and listening to yourself, I struggle with that, and so I appreciate you talking about it, because I feel like it's something that you can have a real passion for something that you did and love where you were when it was good, but then have a hard time and then let it go. I don't know, just
So maybe you can find a way to reapproach that, so you have that scenario, you're doing that. Maybe there's a way you can find to reapproach it with a different angle. So it's about helping find closure and a better resolution to the situation that happened, as opposed to all the gory details and everything else in the mystery solving that. Because then every story you create is about a situation that happened, leading them to the resolution and closure. Situation, resolution, closure, and that's your three acts, so to speak, that you go through and do. And something like that would be wildly different, I think, than what's out there. But that's probably the kind that readers and people would enjoy, because you have the bad thing, the bad, terrible thing, which is why they're buying it. And now you're actually giving them the really good resolution and closure towards the end, which makes them feel good after they've read it. And then they read the next one. You go back and forth. So you have the low, the high, low, the high, low, the high.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think we're at our official end, but if you guys want to ask more questions, we can stick around for a couple minutes.
There's a really good book called The Bestseller Code. Definitely read that one. That talks about the highs and lows, the emotional beats of the stories and arcs and how they all work. We do that because so what I do with a couple of guys that I mentioned in the writing now is we say, okay, give me your outline. So chapter 1. How many scenes are in this chapter? Is it 1? Is it 3? Whatever it is. Every scene. So then we say, okay, there's 3 scenes. So scene 1. Is this a dialogue scene? Is this an action scene? One or the other.